Hi, this is Emily Freitag, and I am so glad today to be talking to Elaine Allensworth, who is the Lewis-Sebring Director of the University of Chicago Consortium. And Elaine, thank you for taking time to talk with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
As we do with all of these interviews, I'd love to start in a personal place and hear a little bit about you and your journey as a learner and what that has taught us about learning, or taught you about learning.
Okay, so I'll go back to my childhood. I grew up in the 70s and early 80s. I think I was very fortunate because I had parents who they're very social and gregarious, and they just are friendly and warm to everyone that they meet. And so I grew up with these just tons of adults constantly in my household from like just all kinds of backgrounds, rural, urban, different nationalities, ethnicities, sexual orientations. I mean, this was in the 70s, and we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. There was not a lot of space, but we always had just tons of people over. They'd sleep over. We just kind of double up. My parents would sleep on the floor in the living room, and we just had people constantly. And and then also my parents, would try to figure out ways to travel. As we'd take road trips all the time, and they would put together these travel and learn trips for students, and then we'd all go on these travel. So I got to travel a lot as a child. And so I just diversity of perspectives growing up was, I think, much more than most people have in terms of the types of people that I was constantly in contact with. And then beyond that, I really believe that diversity and experience, seeing things through different perspectives, is so incredibly important for your own growth as a person. And I think for us as a society, I had a number of formative experiences, I think, that really helped shape who I am, and again, I think it makes me smarter, and makes me really understand the world better. And it's a high school student. I was involved in this organization where you would get trained as a public health worker throughout the year, and then in the summers you would get assigned to work with a Ministry of Health in Central America somewhere, and then you'd send you off to a remote town to do public health, living with a family, to do public health projects. So I was in the sanitation projects. So I go to, I spent a couple summers in Mexico and in Costa Rica, doing projects where we would build latrines. Like I would work with the local men, and I'd live with the family, and we'd build latrines, and so you just learn. And I lived there for a few months each time, and so I got to know the culture, and it was also kind of like stepping back in time because they didn't have running water or electricity, and so it was just really seeing things from a different perspective, and really amazing. And then in college, I would volunteer at a homeless shelter for several days a week, and my job there was not only to do like intake and things like that, but just to problem solve with people about how do we deal with all these different issues. When you lose your income, so you don't have a house, you just have so many things. And so again, and then that also helped me understand our government system and how that works. So I feel like these are like these are kind of things that are challenging and different, but that really, I think, helped me see the world in a different way. And then I think in college, I was one of these people who didn't know what to do, what they wanted to do. I had so many different majors, and I'd throw myself into one major because I was really interested in lots of different things. And then I see it, something else. And I think, oh, maybe I should try that. And so I was a music major and a chemistry pre-med major and a Spanish major. I thought about computer science, and I ended up, realizing, okay, I need to choose something. And I really threw myself into these. I ended up as a Spanish major and education minor, and then I went into teaching because I thought I would like to teach. I always wanted to do a job where I was kind of giving back, and which is why I thought about medicine for a while, and then I went into teaching. But again, I think because I had so many different majors, it was so good for me in so many ways. And And so, you know, like I feel like in my job today, you know, I ended up getting a PhD in sociology, right, in urban studies. So very different, but I feel like because you know, I spent so much time in music and in Spanish and in chemistry and computer science, all these things, I actually feel like I use them in my life, and I feel like it makes me think about things in a different way. So I feel like my brain works better. Like if I'm thinking about learning, I think having all of these very diverse experiences makes me see things in different ways and helps me make connections that I think are just so helpful in so many different ways. So I would say definitely diversity of, like, you don't want to box yourself in, like you want to experience as many different things and different perspectives as you can. Because it's so,
I mean, that has profound effects on school, right?
Yeah.
How we organize school.
I think so, yeah. And I would say another big theme is, I think, the freedom to be creative, you know, growing up. And so I grew up in this, you know, I talked about this apartment. It was in this, so we had lived in 2 different apartment complexes. Both of them were kind of these sprawling, multiple building on the edge of town. And I'm sure people would look at that and say, oh, poor kids growing up there. And I was kind of embarrassed sometimes about, you know, we just live in this small apartment. But those were the best places to grow up. I mean, there were tons of kids, and they were in the outside of town. And so there were all these like fields and forests, and like we would just go off. And I feel bad for kids nowadays that are so super programmed, because I feel like it was the opportunity to just make up stories and adventures and lands and things. And so I feel like creativity is a really important part of learning, and having the opportunity to just explore and try things out, I think is really critical. And then I would say my final things would be this idea of like challenge, but not over challenge. Like I think you get the things that are the hardest to do, like the things where you're so nervous about it or scared or you don't know if you can do it. I think those are really, really important. And I think challenge in school is really important. Like you have to do things that are hard that you maybe don't want to do, because that's how you're going to grow. But I also feel like we sometimes go too much. I feel like I don't feel like I was pushed. I didn't take, my school offered 1 AP class. I didn't take it. You know, again, it was the 80s. I was in a public school. There wasn't a press to go to, you know, highly competitive colleges or anything. I applied to one undergraduate institution, my local state university, and it was free and cheap. And honestly, I feel like I got a great education in high school and in college. And you know, I feel like I learned a lot, and I now, you know, like I'm in this elite environment right now. I work at the University of Chicago again, and I applied to one place for graduate school. I didn't like, you know, I wasn't like trying to get into the best place you can get in. You know, like I feel like that's not, and you know, and I feel like these students these days, they take like, you know, multiple AP classes a year. They're killing themselves, and then they're like, if I don't get into Harvard, I'm going to be so sad. And they are killing themselves. And I just look at that and I think, for what? Why? Like, I don't know that you get something so much better for killing yourself in this kind of academic realm when you'd be so much better off. I feel like, you know, letting yourself try different things and do new things. So I believe you have to challenge yourself, but it's not about always doing the hardest thing and the thing that, you know, like being part of the rat race in terms of, it's about, you know, challenging yourself to do new things, but not like not putting so much pressure on children, not putting so much pressure on yourself that you're making yourself miserable.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate hearing your story and your takeaways so much. Take us now into your research and your experience. I think, you know, we are exploring this question of how do we make sure that we don't further exacerbate inequity with our educational response to this pandemic. And would love to learn from the lessons from Chicago and your research. What do you think we know about what does work in advancing student learning?
You want to figure out systems to make sure that teachers are focusing on students as learners rather than focusing on the structure of their class. And that seems kind of obvious. And I know all teachers would say, you know, I care about my students as learners as the number one thing. But everything that teachers, you know, learn, there's so much that they learn in teacher education, so much that of the pressure that they get in their daily jobs is about the structure of the class. What are you teaching? You know, the kind of more bureaucratic things or the content, rather than really understanding how students are experiencing that class. And in the end, it's how students are experiencing the class that actually matters. It doesn't matter what content you teach if the student is not engaged in that content. But there's just so much to do and so much to keep track of, and you know, it's really easy for the learner to get lost or to make assumptions about why the learner is not succeeding, why the learner is not engaged, or to just not have time to figure out what to do differently. What we've seen in Chicago has just made a dramatically different context especially for high school, although now it's I think filtering down into the earlier grades, is to have systems in place that have data on students, like really key data on students, where teachers are getting together and talking about how to support students in a very real-time kind of way. So in Chicago, a lot of this happened with the early warning indicator systems focused on freshmen on track. We found, you know, 9th grade was a key year for whether students would graduate high school, and now we know also for whether they'll graduate college. 9th grade is this key transition year. It's this year where, you know, you're new to high school, you're figuring things out, you know, and you're figuring out, do I belong here? Can I succeed? Coming up with new strategies for navigating school, you know, navigating classes, new responsibilities. So if you can figure that out and be successful, you're gonna know you can succeed. You know, you're gonna have your systems in place, whatever those are to succeed. If you don't, then you're not gonna figure it out, you know, like later, and you're always going to wonder, you know, am I just going to fail again? Do I really belong here? And that's going to completely undermine me. So we found 9th grade was this really critical year. And then the school district, you know, they developed, real-time data reports that they would give to schools. And then there were several structures that came into place so that, like, some schools had on-track coordinators, other schools were part of a network that would get together and look at data together. And so they developed these systems where, you know, teachers would just get these really simple lists of, you know, each first-time 9th grader kind of flagged by, you know, did their attendance drop, have their grades dropped, you know, are they getting a D or F in one of their classes? And teachers would start to get together and share information about students and start to ask, well, why is the student getting a D? And then reach out to students and hear from them. And what they started to realize, and what we've seen in our research, is like all students want to be successful. Like they want to succeed. It's not that some students don't care, the families don't care, but there are lots of different reasons that students might not be engaging in school. And if you're just kind of letting things go, like, oh, you know, they just don't care, or, you know, oh, you kind of make it, or they're like excuses, oh, they can't do it for this reason or that reason, well, the students fall behind. And the more that they fall behind, the harder it is to catch up. They get frustrated, they feel embarrassed, and that makes them withdraw further. Like, students don't ask for help, you know, when they need it. They get embarrassed, and then they do less, right? They don't want to. So it really took these systems where teachers would reach out to students, find out what's going on, and then they could problem solve around, well, what is happening? How do we deal with whatever this is? You know, and there's so many different things. It could be, you know, taking care of a sick parent, or fear of a bully in the school, not getting along with a teacher. You know, there's so many different things, but you have to figure those things out. And then there's some things that once you start getting together, you know, teachers in the school, you see systematic things that are influencing lots of students. So, or like as a teacher, you don't know what to deal with on your own, but you can figure out strategies together where you can support students together, support each other. And so that made a huge difference. But you have to have a system, and everyone has to participate and work together. And so that's really hard. I mean, I've seen schools where they, you know, they had these huge improvements in students, pass rates and then also learning, because we also find, a lot of people think, oh, learning is about, looking at test scores and then teaching what they need to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've found is focusing on test scores doesn't actually improve test scores very much. Getting students engaged in learning improves their test scores, right? Getting students engaged in learning means they learn more and then they do better on tests. So like with this whole Freshman on Track, initiative, which has now moved into sophomore on track and, back into earlier grades. What we found, there was this idea that, oh, if you really focus on getting more students to pass and stay in school, test scores will go down, standards will go down. And what we found is the opposite has actually happened. The more that students were getting their work done, coming to class, the more they learned and the more test scores went up. So we have more students staying in school and graduating with higher test scores, higher gains.
That feels so significant. Can I just mirror back what I heard and make sure I totally understand? So you said when schools focused on test scores and strategies to improve test scores, it did not lead to improved test scores.
Right.
When schools focused on improving engagement and learning, and is that like attendance and grades?
It's attendance and getting your assignments in, and getting
attendance and getting,
so you can monitor grades, like our students. So basically, they would kind of flag as any student that was getting a D or an F, because obviously they need more support, right? And you want to do it as early as possible, because once students have missed half their assignments or whatever, like it's gonna be really hard to catch up, right? And so you want to do it at least monthly, but maybe even more than that, because basically, if students are getting D's or F's, they're not engaged and they're not learning anything. And so, even if students are getting C's, they're like barely, we've actually kind of tracked this. A's and B's, they're pretty much getting everything done. They're, showing that they're learning on tests, D's, so D's and F's, they're not really learning anything. So, if a student is getting a D and F, if your job is to be delivering content and then students are supposed to, respond to your content, okay. But if your job is to teach that student, you are not succeeding. And, the way that your job is structured might have made that really hard for you. We tend to structure schools as if everything is perfect. Like all students can come to school ready to learn every single day. And if they don't, that's not the teacher's problem, that's not the school's problem, it's the student's problem and their family's problem. So but the thing is, we know that that's not how life works. I mean, we know that families
and
have
especially
crises.
in a pandemic, right?
I know, we know that people don't have the resources so they can get to school every day with clean clothes and food. We know that that is not the case, and yet we structure our schools as if it is.
As if it is.
Even like families with lots of resources, if you talk to them, they will talk about all the extra resources that they've put into their children. Students suffering, from anxiety. I can just think about my colleagues, and like children. The child needs a psychologist. The child needs a doctor. Their child needs a tutor. They have the resources. They can get the extra supports that their child needs. But not all families have that, even though we know that all families need those things. So we have this kind of system that's structured as if everyone is perfectly fine. Everything is perfect and they're ready to go every single day. And that is not reality. And then especially the less that you have resources to, the harder it is to get them to meet those demands. And so
true, so powerful. So what you found was when schools did focus on very early on identifying students that were starting to slip off of their engagement track, right? Not completing assignments. So even before the grades, right? But showing up to school,
right away.
Yeah.
I mean, we found that missing 5 days in your fall semester, 5 days in one semester, in ninth grade, lowered your probability of eventually graduating high school by something like 20 percentage points.
Wow.
That's 5 days. And I mean, it's basically a week, you know, in a semester. It's basically a day a month. So it doesn't even seem like much. Some people think, oh, it's no big deal. But the problem is it adds up. And like, you don't know when you're going to miss something that's really important. And, you know, you just falling behind makes students fall further and further behind. And so
that was going to be my question, is like the causation correlation question, you know, just your hypotheses.
Yeah, and so when schools started doing this, you know, saying, okay, we're gonna, you know, really, you know, keep track as soon as students start having, you know, a couple days of absence or they start missing assignments, you know, let's reach out and let's look at students getting D's or F's and reach out early. So we wondered, well, you know, some of this has got to be spurious, as we say in the research world. You know, there are other things that are causing attendance or causing students not to get their assignments done that also influence graduation, but it's not like, you know, those things will still exist. The things that are affecting graduation aren't doing it to their, you know, students' assignment completion and attendance and their grades. So we thought, well, you're not going to see this perfect relationship, you know, so you might fix attendance and grades and then still not fix graduation.
Have a challenge, sure.
Yeah, so that's what we thought would happen, and that is not what happened.
Interesting.
It absolutely, as schools worked more on improving attendance, improving students' engagement in classes, getting their work done, getting grades up, there was a direct correspondence to not only passing classes, but eventually graduating. And it was the relationship.
And test scores as well.
And test scores went up too, which we did not know that would happen. You know, you could hypothesize that it would happen because you think if you get students more engaged, but people actually thought the opposite would happen in general in schools. Like when we started, I mean, people were very resistant because they think if you focus on students who are the least engaged, you're lowering your standards, right? And so then, like, that's the idea. And then you're going to keep more students in school, and you're, you know, and have students coming to school more who are the low achievers in the class. And so that's going to, so that's going to like make it worse for everyone. But actually, you know, the students they're coming to class anyway, and not being engaged and being behind actually does slow down the class. We have other research that shows that. But when you give students who are struggling extra support, it actually helps everybody. Yeah.
Wow. So take us into what you found worked. Like what kinds of support moves led to better attendance and work completion?
Yeah, well, you have to structure it in ways that support adults to support students. So it's always got to be with the student at the focus and saying, okay, what are we doing to help students? But you've got to figure out systems for adults to support students. Because what normally happens is, you know, teachers will say, well, you know, teachers have responsibility to make sure their students succeed, whatever. But what happens is teachers will do things like, oh, you know, if you need help, come see me after school or at lunch, right? Or, you know, students will come to them with a problem and they'll try to do a solution for their class or whatever. And, you know, well, first of all, students don't come for help when they need it, right? You're kind of leaving it up to the student. You're leaving it up to the student, you're leaving it up to the teacher, and then you're having teachers figure out what to do all on their own when they have no extra information usually beyond what, you know, it's like that isn't successful. So you actually have to have structures that are set up where teachers and other staff in the school potentially are working together. And you can do that in different ways. So one way, and then they're looking at data on students, because you always have to make sure that what you're doing is actually having a positive effect on students. Because also, you know, there's like, a lot of this is like coming up with things that work for your school, right? And work for you, and making sure you have buy-in, right? You can't just like necessarily impose something. It's, you know, but it's focusing on the data, like how are students actually doing, and then is what you're doing making a difference? Like, so
it's almost like a continuous improvement practice.
Continuous improvement kind of thing. And so what we've seen, so some things we saw was, for example, 9th grade team meetings, where you have this, you know, you can use the 9th grade reports on the first-time 9th graders, you know, flag, and then what we'd see is, you know, teachers who would share, like a student might only be flagged in one class, right? So showing like with their attendance and their grades in like their core classes. And so, although we found that non-core classes matter just as much as core classes, so gym and art, all those things actually matter.
Wait, hold on. I want to make sure to mark that. That's big. So attendance and completion of assignments in non-core classes mattered as much as in core classes.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Wow. Super powerful. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, go back. So like the on track is focused on the core classes, the whole system. So having the 9th grade teams. So in some cases, a student might just be struggling in one class, but not struggling in their other classes. So in those cases, then the teacher where they're struggling can a lot of times learn from other teachers how to help that student be successful, right? Or maybe there's one class where they're successful and the others aren't, but and that teacher, knows something about that student that can help the teacher or help.
Did you find there was like a structure to these meetings that was needed?
Yeah, it's important. Yeah, and you need to have a facilitator because sometimes they can be difficult conversations too. Obviously, the first thing you're going to do is start blaming students. Like I cried with the student kind of thing, and so having someone who can, have positive conversations, help encourage that and keep the focus always on how do we help the student. Another structure that some schools use is to have on-track coordinators who were staff members, non-teaching staff members, but they would get the reports and then they would bring, they'd look at, classes where students are getting a D or F, bring in the teacher, the parent, and the student to try to figure out why, what's going on, and then come up with strategies together. So, and always, again, keeping the conversations on the data. Like we all care about, student passing this class, what needs to happen, and so the focus is on the data and trying to end the strategies, right? Or another thing is, there might be students who are, struggling across all their classes. And so then it's trying to figure out what's happening with that student, figuring out, are there other supports that need to be brought in? A lot of students will have things externally that they're really struggling with, but they're embarrassed to talk about them with people. And so then it's like trying to figure out what is happening with the student and how can we support them. And that's beyond what any one teacher could do, right? But it's,
right.
Once you see that, oh, this is not just a problem in 1 or 2 classes. This is, the student is really struggling. Let's, figure out how do we reach out. And then
why aren't schools structured this way? Like I'm just taking myself, back into my own classroom and I'm like sort of puzzling on why isn't this ubiquitous?
I was a teacher too. It's like, there's so much focus on, you go through your content. I don't know. But, and then I remember also, I taught summer school one time. I taught earth science, and it was like mostly students who failed the year before, and then a few students who were trying to get ahead. It was interesting, that were like the smarter students. So it was an interesting experience. But one of the requirements there, because it was very much, it was a compressed time. If a student missed, you had to call home and find out, what was going on.
What's going on?
The student, and then make sure they knew the student could not miss more than whatever it was, 1 or 2 sessions. And I, as a teacher, I had not ever, in the school year, I had never called a parent. And I was required to do this. And I remember, there's one student who's tough guy, kind of and I have to call his mom. I call his mom, she starts talking, and I realized I had her in as a student in my night. I was teaching ESL at night.
Oh, wow.
And she was one of my students there. And I realized I knew her. And it's like, oh my gosh. Is this, and then but we had a connection. He never missed a single day after that. And he became very attentive. I was like, oh my God, why was I not calling parents before? And I started thinking back in the school year, it's like, I had students I really didn't know what to do with, I was really struggling with. Why didn't I call their parents?
And why didn't the system make it happen?
It's like it forced having a policy, where you had to log calls. So it's interesting because when we were doing this work on Freshmen on Track, we did this study to see, well, what's happening in 9th grade? Why are some schools more successful than others? There's this one school had so much like their attendance was on par with the most selective enrollment school in the system. And their ninth grade on track rates were much higher, their graduation rates were higher, but their average income and achievement, if you look at 8th grade test scores, were just slightly below the district average, right? So what was going on with this school? Oh my God, the principal was very, very strict about attendance. So so first of all parents had to sign a thing before the school year that said we will not take students out for trips or anything, right? Students will come every day. So if a student was missing, didn't come to school, every class that student missed, the teacher had to call home and log the call, and the attendance office would call home. If they found out the parents thought the student was in school, they would send someone out to try to find the student.
Oh, wow.
So so parents would be getting multiple calls a day. So immediately it's like sends a message to students, you're not going to skip, and then students are not falling behind, and you're making that connection with the parents so that if like a student is at home, you can you say this is what you're missing, and
take us into COVID with this, because this feels like it just has such powerful implications. I mean, so many policy leaders and school leaders are trying to figure out what does even attendance mean if you're in a totally distant setting. What do you think are the lessons from this for this time?
Yeah, well, I think that all of the things I just said are even more important now.
Even more
now,
true.
Yeah, and now, students aren't there, so definitely teachers are going to be relying on parents. And families. Communication really key. Reaching out to students to understand how they're experiencing. If you don't have students in front of you, how do you know if they're and then we've heard this. Some students are spending just a ridiculous amount of time trying to get all the work done that their teachers are doing, because their teachers don't understand how hard it is for them to do the work because they're not there in front of them. And then other students, parents are saying, "Oh, my students are doing nothing. Like the teachers aren't asking them to do anything hardly. So under challenged." Not having the students in front of you, you have no idea unless you're actually talking to students or talking to parents for younger children, especially, to find out how they're engaging. And then also, because the students are going to have very different settings in order to engage in learning in terms of the access to technology and the connectivity issues, but also in terms of space, in terms of time, in terms of the ability of parents to provide support. It's going to be so variable. And then not to mention, the stress from the pandemic and from, the economic fallout of the pandemic, families could be going through all different things. So that communication is going to be really key. But I do think you can still use the same general principle of looking at assignment completion. Like if students are getting their work done, that they're engaged. I mean, you want to make sure that if they're not feeling overstressed and, that they feel like they have a support in them, that it's work that they feel like they have some interest in. And, but what you really want to make sure is if students are not getting any assignments and you understand why, is it too hard? Is it that they don't, and then you can problem solve with family members about whatever those issues are, or with other, it depends. Obviously at younger grades, you might be the only teacher. At older grades, there are multiple teachers to coordinate with, but then trying to figure out what it is the students need so they get those resources to engage in school. And, another thing is I think a lot of times right now people are saying, just, people, can't handle, there's just a lot going on. So we've got to, we got to be careful. But it's we've got to be understanding that people are not going to be able to engage as, students, teachers, parents, everyone's going to be under stress. But you also don't want to give up on students too and families.
Because the truth that you started with, kids want to succeed. Nothing about this context has changed that, right?
Yes. And, family, and as I say, families with more resources, they can buy their way out of a lot of stresses and problems, right? And so if you just say, families, they don't have the connectivity, they don't have they're too stressed out, well, you're just going to be increasing inequality, right? You're just going to be letting inequality get wider and wider, right? And I think even when families are under stress, they care a lot about their children's education, And so it's not just saying, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it, but thinking about, well, how can we structure, you know, do things in ways where students really are engaged in learning, you know.
I've learned so much from this. Any final thoughts?
Oh,
I know,
man, we're almost over.
I know. We, any thoughts on, you talked about a number of things that we try that don't work. Are there any other things that you would want to highlight there?
In terms of don't work? Well, maybe I'll go back to what I was starting with. You know, I do think too much, and I know a million people have said this, but maybe I'll put my own take on it, which is too much of this focus on test scores and our students meeting, you know, benchmarks on test scores. I think is really, really problematic for kids in a lot of ways. When, you know, before I was talking about how you want to have a diversity of experience, I feel like the more that you're just focused, you know, the way just focusing on the test, actually it hurts the test, like, you know, like literacy scores, reading comprehension, all those things. You can't, like, the reason, you know, you can't read, you can't understand this whole idea of we read to learn. No, I'm sorry. We understand what we're reading because we've had this experience and we understand what it is we're reading, and we can read then to get more nuance. But if you don't understand what it is you're reading, you don't have the frameworks to understand it, you can't understand it, right? And so the more that we're limiting students' experiences, and the breadth of what they're learning, and not allowing for creativity. You know, I think creativity is really important. You want to have student agency in learning. You don't want to kind of limit them to the kinds of ways that they can show that they've learned, because in real life, they need to be able to really think creatively. And so, you know, and I do worry that we're so focused on, oh no, their test scores are going to fall behind, that we're going to say, okay, it's hard to do any learning. Let's just focus on those tested skills. When actually, you know, what's really important right now is that students are engaged and excited about learning, because it's going to be hard to get them to get stuff done when you're not there. And so thinking about how can we do, you know, really creative things that take advantage of the internet or whatever to do things in a way that's more mind expanding.
I love that.
The best way for kids.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for this conversation and for all of your
pleasure.
I enjoyed it immensely.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.